Peacemaker cost a whopping $17.50. Today, an original Colt is gonna set you back at least a couple of grand. So, Johnny, you better start saving your nickels and dimes. Brian in Chester, New York, shot me an email saying that his great-grandfather was one of Merrill's Marauders during WW2. And Brian writes, who the hell was Merrill? And what about his Marauders? Well, Brian, you are a pathetic piece of civilian slime. Haven't you ever heard of a little thing called history books? Once again, the old gunny has to square ignorant couch potatoes like you away.
Of all the elite and special warfare units that fought in World War II, none of them took it to the extremes that Merrill's Marauders did. Organized in India in October of 1943, the Marauders were officially called the 5307th Composite Unit Provisional, also known as Galahad Force. But the name that stuck was one that the press gave them, Merrill's Marauders, after their commanding officer, General Frank D. Merrill. Now, Merrill was General Douglas MacArthur's intelligence officer in Manila before the war. He used all that gathered knowledge to his advantage when he and his Marauders went up against the Japanese in the jungles of northern Burma. But just getting there was half the battle. They had to hack their way through some badass jungle, and not all of it was flat. They had to climb over some pretty steep mountains, too. But no matter where they went, the Marauders did in fact lie. Everything they needed had to be carried on their backs, and on the backs of their four-legged friends.
The Marauders relied heavily upon their pack animals. They were the long-range, deep penetration reconnaissance group. What they couldn't carry on their backs, they carried on their animals. They specifically used mules to carry their extra ammunition, medical supplies, food, weapons, whatever they could.
Now, the Marauders were made up of 3 battalions, and the eyes and ears of each battalion was its I&R, or Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon. Their job was to go ahead of their battalion to see if the coast was clear, and if there were any enemy troops in the area. But unlike normal recon units, the Marauder I&R platoons would engage the enemy if they found them, knowing that the rest of the battalion would come running to back them up. The Marauders got good at messing with the enemy and played some pretty sneaky tricks on them out in the jungle.
The I&R platoons were very crafty in how they would mislead the enemy as to their whereabouts. One of their tricks was when they would come to a stream or river, they would split the platoon in half. Half would walk about half a mile down the trail, stop, and then go back in their footsteps, and then march back in and through the river. This way, when the Japanese came upon their trail, they would follow the footsteps on the hard trail. And once the footsteps ended, they would be befuddled as to where the Marauders had gone.
To keep out of harm's way, the Marauders had to live on the run and could only be resupplied from the air. Being a Marauder was no walk in the park. Now, it took a lot of guts to keep on going day after day like they did, and there wasn't a single one of them who didn't suffer from one tropical disease or another. Even their commanding officer, General Merrill, pushed himself so hard that he had a damn heart attack and had to be evacuated. Now, after a grueling 6-month-long campaign, the Marauders had accomplished their mission. They had stopped the Japanese from advancing and robbed them of men and resources that could have been used on the front lines. Sadly, after it was all said and done, they got Jack and Diddley for accolades. And to this day, the Marauders remain some of the most unappreciated dog faces of World War II.
The biggest threat to our troops in Burma was disease, exhaustion, and starvation. But over in the European theater, it was a different story altogether. Every day, it seemed like the Germans were coming up with some new kind of weapon to test our fighting spirit. And Deb in Spokane, Washington, wants to know about one that some of our boys nicknamed the Screaming Mimi.
The German Wehrmacht were the first troops to use rocket artillery in World War II. In 1941, they put a world of hurt on the Soviet Army with this baby, the Nebelwerfer 41. A year later, the self-propelled Panzerwerfer 42 was added to the inventory. These monsters were capable of firing rocket-powered shells filled with incendiary liquids, lethal chemicals, or even high explosives. The launchers were portable, but not too accurate. So the German solution to that little problem was to go for volume, volume, volume. And at short range, the Germans could lay down a hell of a lot of fire and destruction in just a few seconds. Some of the most common rockets had a high explosive warhead with a motor loaded on the front that made a pretty distinctive noise. Some Allied troops started calling them Moanin' Minis, but it was the name Screamin' Mimis that stuck. As a matter of fact, the name has lasted a whole lot longer than the rockets themselves.
That baby had one major drawback. The rockets left a long trail of smoke from target to launcher, kind of like a big white arrow saying, "Hey GI, counter-strike, here!" Which is exactly what we did. We sent these bad boys back to the scrap heap, and our troops on to victory. Semper Fi, carry on. Guys, got a little emergency here. Careful. Here. Now, back in 1873, a Colt State, Brian in Chester, New York, shot me an email saying his great-grandfather was one of Merrill's great Marauders. The biggest threat that we had... Got a plug, right? Give me the...